Prithvi Shantirantariksha Shantir Dyav Shantir Disha Shantiravantara Disha Shantiragni Shantir Vayu Shantiraditya Shantish Chandrama Shantir Nakshatrani Shantirapashantiroshadaya Shantir Vanaspataya Shantir Gau Shantiraja Shantirashva Shantir Purusha Shantir Brahma Shantir Brahmana Shantir Shantireva Shanti Shantir Me Astu Shantihi. May there be peace on earth and in the sky. May there be peace in the water and in all directions. May there be peace in the plants, in the trees, and in animals. May there be peace in the hearts of all beings. May there be peace in everyone and in everything. Sarvetra sukhinas santu, sarve santu niramayaha, sarve bhadrani pashyantu, ma kaschit dukkha bhag bhavet, sarvastaratu durgani, sarvo bhadrani pashyatu, sarvas sadbuddhimapnotu, sarvas sarvatra nandatu. May all be happy and healthy. May all see what is good, and may no one experience misery. May all overcome their obstacles and acquire good tendencies. May people everywhere find joy and fulfillment. Let us now spend some time touching the center of peace and joy in our hearts. A good way to begin the practice is to withdraw the scattered energies of the mind and bring them to rest on one point. That point can be our own breathing. Let us therefore practice breathing with awareness. As we breathe in, let us visualize that our body and mind are being filled with love, strength, and compassion. And as we breathe out, let us release all the stress, anxiety, and exhaustion in the body and mind. Let us practice this way for a while. Let us now turn our attention to the region of our heart. Although God is present everywhere and in everyone, the divine presence can be felt most clearly in our own hearts. We can meditate in any way we have been taught. To remain focused, we can take the help of a short mental prayer or a mantra or a divine name. Let us now spend some time dwelling on the presence of God in our hearts. Om Asato ma Satkamaya Tamaso ma Jyotirgamaya Mrityorma Amritam Gamaya Aviravirmaheti Rudrayatte Dakshinam Mukham Te Namam Pahi Nityam. May the Divine lead us from the unreal to the real, from darkness to light, from death to immortality. May the Divine Consciousness fill our hearts and protect us. So we start today on verse number 10. That's on page 17 if you have the hard copy. Sanyasya sarvakarmani bhavabandha vimuktaye yatyatam panditair dhiraihi atmabhyasa upasthitaihi. Those who are learned and wise should renounce all work and strive to remain engaged in the pursuit of the Atman in order to be freed from the bondage of the world. We saw last time what does this condemnation of work, karma, mean throughout this text, but especially in the opening verses. It's not, sometimes when we just express the word karma as work in English, it just flattens the meaning, so to speak. It takes away all the nuances involved in the word karma. And one important nuance here is renouncing work is really renouncing the agency of action. Because Shankaracharya, who wrote this text, was writing this text. So there was some work occurring already. So what is meant here is that the work or activity occurs. In order to do any activity, we need our senses, we need our hands, feet, eyes, nose, all the senses. And it is with the help of these senses and the mind that every activity is accomplished. The problem is not in the work itself or in the activity itself. The problem is in thinking that I am doing it. That's the only meaning to be understood, and that's always to be kept in mind. The word for the bondage of the world here, the Sanskrit word here is bhavabandha. The bondage of the world is really the bondage of duality. The Sanskrit word bhava means to become. It's the becoming. So we could say bandha is bondage, bhava means becoming. So it's the bondage of becoming. Let me just briefly mention, and we will have occasions to discuss it in detail later on, the difference between being and becoming. Vedanta's position is that in reality, we are infinite, pure, perfect beings. We are the Atman, we are the spirit. We have nothing to do with matter, nothing to do with material thing. That's who we are. But from that state of existence, somehow we have become somebody else. From being immortal beings, we have become mortal creatures. From being divine beings, we have become human beings. So all of the limitations that we experience now is a result of becoming. And so although sometimes we might speak about becoming enlightened or becoming free, that's not a very accurate way of expressing it, because the becoming has already occurred. It's actually now unbecoming really has a different meaning, but it's the opposite of becoming. We have to go back to being who we are. And there is a saying attributed to, of all people, Karl Marx, who said that the more we have, the less we are. I think it's a very profound saying. Of course, it was used in primarily to discuss about economics and the social upheavals and all of that. But it's true that having something involves having a sense of ownership to something. And once I own something, I've already departed from being who I was before. So similarly, if I'm the infinite being, and now my present experience is that I'm a finite mortal creature, I have become somebody else from what I was. So enlightenment can be seen as a process of reversing this becoming and going back to being, which is why also work is not needed. For instance, right now, even in our present state, if I have to become somebody in life, I have to work hard for it. I have to do the thing necessary to become. But now, we could say, well, right now we are human beings. In order to be a human being, we don't have to do anything. We already are human beings. But if I want to, in addition to being a human being, I want to be the president, I want to be this, I want to do that, then I have to do work for it. But to be a human being right now, we already are. That's the position. That right now, we are already the Atman. We are already the infinite being. So we don't have to do anything. But, so here is this question. If we don't have to do anything, then why are we even reading this book? What is the utility of all the meditation and prayer and all sorts of things people do in order to become enlightened? Things that we do as a part of our spiritual practice is not to become the Atman, which we are already. We are already the Atman. Everything that we do is to actually remove the layers that seem to have come upon us. That's all that we can do, which is also what teachers do in school, which is also what a gardener does. We can't make a tree grow. We can't do that. The potentiality of growth is already present in the seed. All that we can do is to remove the obstructions that could come in order for that seed to manifest into a plant and then later into a tree. So all that I can do is I can provide sunshine, I can provide enough nutrients, take care that the sheep and goat don't come and eat away at the growing plant. That's all that I can do. So parents, teachers, when they take care of their children or students, you cannot put knowledge into them. Knowledge is already there. All that we can do as much as possible to help remove the layers of ignorance above, and the light within will already shine forth. So all these things have to be kept in mind when we read that renouncing all work, because it is not about doing something, it's about being who we are. So one final point about this. I said that Vedanta students do their practices, so they are doing something as well. But doing a Vedanta practice is a little bit different from doing any other activity. And that is because even when we are doing, say, meditation, even we are doing reflection that we are the Atman, that's still an activity. But this activity is meant to make me realize that I'm not doing anything. So I'm doing something with the hope, with the idea, with the goal to know that I'm not doing anything. And that's why a Vedantic practice, even though it does involve body and mind, it does involve some activity, can be distinguished from other activities because the goal of this activity is to know that I'm not the doer. On the contrary, all other activities, they actually reinforce our sense of agency. They reinforce the idea that I'm the one who is doing it. And it just doesn't stop there. Once I feel I have done something, then I feel I have the right to its results. I have the right to its fruits. It's like you have worked hard over something and somebody else comes and gets the credit for that work. You are hurt. You feel I did all the work and someone else is now being praised for it. So it's not just about doing, because once I do, then I have this desire to reap the results of my actions. And that's why this verse says, those who are learned and wise in the sense, those who keep all this in mind. So if what I have said up to this point resonates with you, if it makes sense to you, then you're already learned and wise, to some extent at least. Then renounce all sense of agency. Again, this doesn't mean give up all your duties and responsibilities. Every one of us, no matter where we are, no matter who we are, certain duties and responsibilities come upon us. We can do them. In fact, we should do them, as the later verses will point out, but without the sense that I am doing it. And there are great benefits from doing everything that needs to be done without putting this big I behind every activity. Look at verse 11. Chittasya shuddhaye karma natu vastupalabdhaye vastu siddhi vicharena na kinchit karma kotibhihi. Work is for the purification of the mind, not for the attainment of the real. The real is experienced through deep reflection, never through millions of activities. The word for real in this verse is vastu. That's the word often gets used in Sanskrit to refer to that reality, vastu, as opposed to something that is not real, is avastu. These thinkers spent a long time asking for the meaning of real, meaning of reality. And that's not something we often do. We just feel, oh, what is real, what is unreal is so obvious. Why should I spend some time defining it? But I think it's very helpful. Even when those who say, I believe in God, if God is real, what does that really mean? I see that all of you are sitting here. I see you, I see these walls, I see these lights, and I could say, well, all these are real because I'm seeing them. Now, when I say God is real, or when I say the self is real, does it mean the same thing? And this question will be addressed throughout this text. But to mention it very briefly, these thinkers make a very simple equation for the definition of reality. In Sanskrit, it is Satya, means that which is real, equals Nitya, means that which is eternal. So that's the simple equation. If something is real, it is eternal. In other words, there is no such thing as a temporary reality. That if a magician now comes in front of you and says, look, my hands are empty, and then does some abracadabra, some magic, and says, oh, here is a rose now, and then again closes the fist and does something and the rose vanishes. Is that rose real? The dreams that we see at night, is the dream world real? And I doubt any of us would feel that the dream is real. And we say, no, it's not real. Why is it not real? Well, it simply vanishes. When I wake up, everything is gone. What we are essentially saying, that if the dream world had persisted the way this waking world seems to persist day after day after day, then I would say that the dreams are real. But the dream world does not continue, has no persistence the way the waking world is. There is no other evidence that the dream world is unreal and this world is real. That's the only reason we can give, because everything else is completely identical. In the dream, I first of all don't know it's a dream. While I'm dreaming, it's all very real to me. If I feel thirsty in my dream, well, there is this glass of water and I can drink it. I can't say, well, just to dream water, it's not real. But that thirst is not real either. Not only that, only the dream water can quench my dream thirst. Let's say I find myself in the middle of the Sahara Desert in my dream, and I'm dying for lack of water. There is a water right by my bedside, which I had put before going to bed. That glass of water next to me is totally useless. It can't help me in my dream world. But in the dream, everything functions the way things ought to function. When we wake up, it all looks very bizarre. It doesn't make sense. But in the dream, think about it this way. In the dream, if someone were to come and tell you in your dream, hey, this is the dream, you're not going to believe that person. You're going to say, are you gone out of your head? This is very real. Actually, that's exactly what many of these books are telling us right now, that this is a dream. Now, of course, it makes no sense at all, because it completely goes against our ideas that we have nourished right from the time we were growing up about the waking world as being something very stable, something out there. So this real vastu, that is one focus of inquiry into this book. And the basic premise of Vedanta is that all of our problems at various levels of various kinds come simply because we have forgotten the real and we are mistaking the unreal for the real. That's all. That's just the thing. When I'm able to see the real as real, my problem will be solved. It's not just understanding it intellectually. It's actually experiencing it. And so work is for the purification of the mind. So all of the work that we can do, if it is done without the self-interest uppermost in our mind, then that work can purify our heart. So there are clearly two ways of doing any activity, any work. One is, I do this work, and of course I want the results for it. I do it with a certain motive, and I want it to be successful. If it is successful, I will be benefited in different ways. If it doesn't succeed, I'm going to lose some things. So either my activity can be punctuated by a desire to attain certain results, or the other way of doing work is doing what should be done as best you can and say that the results will take care of them itself. And I think that seems to be a very sensible way to do it, because think about it this way. If I now fix a good cup of tea or coffee, if you like, with the desire to enjoy that cup of coffee or tea, of course, if I have prepared a good quality tea or coffee, of course I'm going to enjoy it. But you can do exactly the same thing without necessarily saying, no, I'm going to enjoy it. All I want is this enjoyment of tea. Without that thought, this is the way a good tea is to be prepared. I'm going to prepare a good tea. So that quality of the tea will not be any different whether or not you hold that desire for the end in your heart or not. On the other hand, if you do some work without thinking of its results, but doing it just, there is such a thing as love of excellence, that even if I have to vacuum my room, I'm going to do it perfectly. Not because I'm expecting any appreciation of someone, not because of anything, just because I like to do things perfectly. That's a good motivation one can have. And of course, whatever benefit any activity will bring, that will come. It's not as if you didn't desire it. So if you make a cup of coffee and without any big desire for it, the cup of coffee won't say, no, you can't drink it because there was no desire. No, you can still enjoy that cup of coffee. In other words, our desire for the result plays no role whatsoever in the quality of the work. In fact, I think it affects the quality of the work in a negative way. Because if a part of my mind is thinking about, after I finish this work, I can do this, I can do that, I'm not really giving my full mind to that activity. So if I can keep that part out, more of my mind, more of my concentration will be given, the quality of my work will improve. And if I can do that, then it will purify my mind. And when it purifies my mind, what does the purification of mind really mean? It means making the mind more clear. It's like if your windshield of your car, if you have not cleaned it for a long time, you can still drive, you can still see things, but maybe not so clearly. But if you have cleaned it well, then it's a joy to drive. That's the mind, you could say, is the windshield of this car. And the more clear the mind is, it's a joy to live. The great joy will come when we are enlightened. Even before enlightenment, we can already enjoy a kind of bliss just by having that mental clarity. And that mental clarity will come the more the sense of doership, the sense of agency is kept out. The real is experienced through deep reflection. The word here is vichara. Vastu siddhi vicharena. And this will be discussed further in the book as well. What does this deep reflection involve? And we will discuss it further when we come to it later on in the text. And never through millions of activities. Verse 12. Samyak vicharata siddha rajju tattvavadharana Bhrantodita mahasarpa bhaya dukkha vinashini. Knowledge of the real rope, revealed through right reflection, destroys the suffering caused by the great fear of the snake conjured through misperception. So, it's going to be a lot of rope and snake throughout this book. Get ready for it. And it's a very helpful example, understood in a proper way, I mean, it's possible to misunderstand that example, simple as it is, but understood in a right way, it's extremely helpful to understand the basic premise that this book presents before us. And most of you, I guess, are familiar with it already. So there is this semi-lit room. There is light, but not enough light. You walk into that room and you see a snake, a coiled snake. And most people are afraid of snakes. For most people, the immediate reaction is fear. And people do different things when they are afraid. But then maybe you just go a little closer and look at it, or maybe you go and switch on the light. As soon as there is more light externally, you see, oh, this is not a snake at all. It's just a rope, a coiled rope. So I was seeing a coiled rope, but because of insufficient light, I mistook that rope for a snake. So this is what this verse is pointing out. Knowledge of the real rope revealed through right reflection. So here, the reflection is really the light that you put. Just as reflection illumines the heart through the light of knowledge, the rope snake analogy, because it is dealing with external entities, we're speaking about the external light. So now, very briefly, this is not about the mistakes that we make in the world. Yes, we do. We do mistake one thing for another in the world. But this example really is about ourselves. I am the rope. And there is ignorance here, insufficient light in the heart. So I'm mistaking my true rope nature, and rope is the Atman here, and seeing a snake. I'm seeing a human being. So just as a snake gets superimposed on the rope, a human being gets superimposed on the divine being. A mortal creature gets superimposed on the immortal being. And so this is an important point to remember, because this rope snake analogy is not about things outside. It's really about the self. So keep that in mind, because as I said, the rope and snake is going to appear again and again and again. The great fear of the snake is really our present experience. Now, if we ask most people what your present experience is, many will say that life is just filled with both. There is happiness and there is sorrow. The Sanskrit word for that is sukha and dukkha. And which is the story of our lives? We just go from one to the other. There are great, wonderful, pleasant things happening in our life which bring a lot of joy, a lot of happiness. But that alternates with some other things which are not so pleasant. Some of them are terrible, and they produce a lot of sorrow and suffering. But that sorrow and suffering doesn't continue endlessly, because again something good happens, and then we are happy again. So we go like a tennis ball from one court to the next. Happiness, then misery, then happiness, misery. Our whole life can be seen as just kind of going back and forth between these two. So people who reflect on this deeply ask, is that all to life? Just continuously just going from one to the next? Every time we are miserable, we weep, we cry, and hope that, well, something good will happen. And it does happen. Something good does happen. And then we are happy again. We rejoice, we celebrate. But again, that gets affected. Well, the Red Sox won yesterday, and there's a great celebration. It doesn't mean they're going to win every game. They're going to lose sometimes. And then fans are going to be miserable. So is that simply our life? So that's one thing, joy and sorrow. But if we look deeper, if we look even more closely at our experience, we might see that it's not joy and sorrow, but it's just sorrow. And this is something that great ones have already pointed out. In fact, a recurring theme that occurs in Buddha's teachings was this: life is suffering. In the Gita, Sri Krishna says, Anityam asukham lokam imam prapya bhajasvamam. Anitya means temporary. Asukham, joyless. Just look at this use of adjectives. He doesn't refer to the world as filled with joy and sorrow, which is we think is our present experience. Krishna says it's a joyless world. Buddha says life is suffering. Now, if these kind of statements were made by some people who are depressed, or people who had nothing in life, people who lacked, then we probably would say, well, that's been just their experience. It's just been suffering all around. But if we look at the personalities of Krishna and Buddha, we see just the opposite. You look at any Buddha's picture, we see that there is such a great peace there. Buddha doesn't look like he's suffering at all. He just seems in bliss, in peace. Those who have looked at Krishna's life, they just see he's the most lovable, joyful being that there was. So these people who themselves were so happy and peaceful, when they say this life is just suffering, we need to take those words to heart and say, what could they have meant when they said that? We could think of joy and sorrow as of two kinds. One is the joy that the temporal joy that we all experience in life. Some good things happen, there is a good news, and your favorite team wins, or your favorite dish is cooked for that day, or some people who you wanted to meet, you get to see them after a long time, and there is joy. So there are different ways and different reasons that we feel happy in life. And there are different reasons we feel miserable also. Clearly, poverty, homelessness, all these are real causes of pain and suffering in life. So this is one level of joy and sorrow that we experience in our life. But if we look deeper, there's another kind of pain and sorrow that is underneath. It's almost like a foundation of all these other pains and sorrows that we experience in life. It's the pain and sorrow connected with our very existence as human beings. In other words, these other kinds of pain and sorrow, some amongst us may have them, some amongst us may not have them. Poverty is a real problem, but not every person in the world is poor. Homelessness is a real problem, but not every person is homeless. But this other kind of pain and sorrow, no one is exempt, no exceptions. And so we could refer to this pain and sorrow as existential. that which is connected with our very existence. Right now, as our existence as human beings, there is illness. Well, in COVID times, we know what it means. We also know that no matter how much care I take, no matter how much organic food I eat or how often I go to the gym, I am going to fall ill sometimes. No one can say that they have never fallen ill in life. The body is a great instrument, but by no means a perfect instrument. It fails. Sometimes it fails more often, sometimes it fails less often, but it fails sometime or the other. So illness is connected with our very existence as living beings. Aging, we can hide the fact that we are aging. We can pretend that we are not aging, but we cannot stop the process itself. And those of us who are getting old now, getting in age, know that there are aches and pains and associated with the process of aging. The vitality of the body and mind doesn't remain same throughout our life. So, and this is not to speak about the social, cultural pressures and almost like a stigma associated with old age. There is so much of glorification of youth in the kind of societies and cultures we live that people don't like to be told that they are old. So there is all this physical and mental pressures associated with aging. And of course, there is the reality of death. There is a pain and suffering associated with anxiety related to it and the process as we near our death also. So, death, illness, aging, no one is exempt. That is what the Buddha and Krishna were referring to when they said life is suffering, because that no one is exempt from it. And then the limitations of the mind itself, that the mind is limited. I would want to read 1,000,000 books. I can't. The mind just won't absorb it. So the body is limited, the mind is limited. And living our entire existence through this limited and imperfect body and mind is not a happy experience. But because most people's lives are so superficial, they just are on the surface, enjoying this joy and sorrow of daily life, that this underlying deeper sorrow may not be or may not be uppermost in their mind at all. It's like if someone is sentenced to, say, 50 years in prison. So maybe the first few days or months or years, this person is going to feel, oh, I'm not free. I'm just kind of locked behind these bars. But then very soon, people who have been behind bars for years get used to the life there. And then if they're given some special dish on some day, they celebrate. So there is this kind of a joy they experience. And then, of course, there are lots of causes of suffering and pain inside the prison system as well. But the underlying all of those joys and sorrows that these inmates experience is the real thing, that they're all not free. They're all behind bars. That's our situation. We are locked in the prison house of this limited body and mind. And rather than reflecting on it, most people are just happy with these daily joys and sorrows which come and go, which bounce, between whom we bounce back and forth. Now this looks a pretty depressing picture. So let me bring a note of hope into it. Just as there is this pain and sorrow associated with our very existence as the limited mortal human beings, there is joy associated with being the Atman, being this spiritual self. So I just have to just make this simple change. I have to stop being a human being and start being a divine being. So on paper, it really looks very simple. You don't have to do anything. Just stop seeing yourself as a human being and know that you are the Atman. But once we start actually practicing this, we realize how difficult it is. It may be possible to hold that thought for a moment or two. Maybe if you're strong, if you have a strong willpower, maybe 30 seconds or a minute. But then something happens, and because we have looked upon ourselves as this, I am this body-mind creature, this is me, that force of that way of thinking is so strong. It's not just a few days old or a few years old. We have been thinking like this being our identity for millions and trillions of births. So don't be disappointed if you say, well, I'm trying to think I'm the Atman, but how often I forget it. It'll be a miracle if you don't forget it. So forgetting is natural. But all that I need to do is, can I now find a way to remind myself of that as often as I can? Without getting discouraged, without getting disappointed, even if I forget it, again, once back, bring the mind to that. And that's the basic practice. But this book going forward then will give us many different helpful tips about how to stop thinking in the wrong way, how to start thinking in the right way. And that is what is the meaning of right reflection. And that's what we will see going forward. So I'll stop here now. If you have any thoughts, ideas, comments, questions, you can come up and speak with this mic here. Yeah.
Swamiji. Swamiji, to purify the mind, it seems it's important to learn how to forget. How do we practice learning how to forget?
Good question. It doesn't help to try to remember what we have to forget because then we won't forget it. But at any given time, the mind can only think of one thing. So it's a little bit like if you have a little child at home who is playing with a certain toy, and you don't want that baby to be playing with that toy. Maybe the baby might get hurt, or maybe it's not good. And if you just snatch it away, the baby is going to cry. And what you can do is give another toy, maybe which is even more attractive, or but which you feel is good for the baby. And then the baby then takes up that new toy, and then the other toy, gradually you can take it away. Our mind is like that. So if our mind is gotten used to thinking about things, and especially about oneself in a particular way, the best way to forget it is to give the mind a better way to think. Something that will bring the mind greater joy and greater fulfillment. And the more the mind remains engaged with that way of thinking, the less it'll think about this wrong way in which it was thinking before. And you see, sometimes you will see that if you haven't met a person, say, you knew some person, maybe not so closely, but there was an acquaintance, and you haven't met them for 20 years or 25 years. And suddenly out of the blue, the person shows up. You may not always recognize, especially if that person's dimensions have changed. The person is looking very different. So that's what will happen with the mind. If I keep my mind engaged with some wholesome, healthy, positive ideas, these unhealthy, unwholesome ideas that my mind was busy with, and if my mind hasn't engaged with them for a long time, after some time, they will lose their hold on the mind.
Namaskar, Swamiji. Swamiji, 2 questions. First, if the true reality is God and something else, then, and if we somehow perceive that, then how can we focus our minds in this reality when we know that the true reality is something else? Isn't that disorienting for a beginner? And second question is, how do we build the strength? Let's say I'm in that sub-dark room where I'm seeing the rope. I think it's a snake, and I finally realize it's a rope. But there's a part of me that's holding back and unable to commit fully because it's a risk. So how do you let go of that risk to truly see that it's a rope? Because if it's really a snake, then you're in trouble. But you don't know whether it's a rope or a snake, right? Yeah. So how do you...
No, but you're seeing a snake, and that's why you are upset, you're angry, you're afraid. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But you have to, how would I figure out whether that, I would have to go
switch on the
deeper.
light. Simple. Yeah.
But what if there's no light? And
then run for your life.
Exactly, right?
No, that's fine. Running away from a rope is not going to hurt you. So even if it's really a rope, but you run away from it, it's not going to hurt you. Right. So if you see a snake and there is no other way to protect yourself, run.
Right.
Yeah. But again, this was not to make it too light of the situation, but here the snake is our present perception of who we are. We cannot run from it. The external snake, maybe you run out of the room. But here, all of the worries and anxieties related with my human identity, I cannot run away from it. And so we have to deal with it. I have to find a way to switch on the light. And yes, it is going to be a bit disorienting. But in some ways you could say either a blessing or a curse is that the experience itself never lasts too long. And for that matter, it's not just about spiritual experience, it's really any experience. Like you, going back to that cup of coffee, if you're truly enjoying that cup of coffee, that enjoyment, that experience of that good coffee lasts as long as that coffee is on your tongue. That's all. Once it passes this area, after that it's just hard work, they're digesting it. So the experience of a coffee is for a limited duration. In fact, every experience in life is of a limited duration. What remains is the memory of that. But the experience itself is always of a very short duration. Also, the force of past habits, even the way of thinking, will come and cover that experience soon. You see, if you have just returned from a vacation to some place, memories of that place are very fresh in your mind. But then once you become busy with all your daily chores, after a few days, you say, oh yeah, I had gone there someplace, and then you even forget the specific things you saw there because other experiences have come and covered it. That is what happens. Even if one gets a glimpse into something beyond, it's a very short experience oftentimes. And while the memory of that might remain, that experience gets covered by other experiences and doesn't have the same impact. Think about a surgeon who is very busy operating on people, who is maybe in a day has done some 4 or 5 surgeries, that surgeon knows exactly what is inside a human body, knows exactly what things are. And it's not a pretty picture. If you've seen a body which is cut open, it's not at all pretty. But when the same surgeon goes home and meets their family, they're not remembering all those blood and all the stuff they saw. Because that experience, which maybe is a daily experience for a surgeon, gets covered by these other experiences. So it's like that. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Namaskar, Swami. In the 9th verse,
Little louder.
yeah,
Hold the mic. Yeah, correct.
it
Yeah.
says that uddharet atmana atmanam. So from the atman itself, self, which is indulged in the world, has to you have to lift it from self, which is having a real perception. That's what it says. But where are there two selves?
Where does it say?
In the 9th verse.
9th verse?
Yeah. I think
Uddharit, yes, right, yeah.
So if it is self doesn't do anything, no action.
Now here
What
by the
action?
self is meant the word mind.
Okay.
Yeah. So every time you hear the word Atma in the text, don't immediately conclude that it is this spiritual infinite Atman. The Atma simply means the self. In fact, the word Atma is sometimes used to refer to the body also. The idea is, right now, if I think that this is me, then the body is kind of pretending to be the self. When my mind is happy or miserable, and if I feel I am happy or miserable, I'm identifying with the mind, and the mind becomes kind of like false prophets, like a false self. So there are many false selves here right now. And knowledge really means recognizing the real self and eliminating these other false selves. So uddharet atmana atmanam, lifting the self by the self, really means lifting that part of the mind which is immersed in the material world by that part of the mind which has become awakened. Yeah, Akshay.
Namaskar, Swamiji. How does worshipping Ramakrishna's form, physical form, help us realize our divine nature? Is there something about the physical form of an awakened avatar that is different?
Yes, thank you. In the devotional schools of thought, they believe that the forms of the divine are special in the sense that when you look at the form of the Buddha or Ramakrishna or Jesus or any of these great ones whom we worship as saints and saviors and prophets, we think about the divine. We think about the spirituality. I mean, why would even anyone want to meditate on Ramakrishna? I mean, just externally, superficially, here's this unlettered, uneducated priest in a small little village in Bengal in 19th century India. Well, there are many such people. Why? What's so special about meditating on him? How did I even hear of him? And the reason is that when some people who have read about him, heard about him, and feel that his life, his personality, his attainments resonate with their own spiritual ideal. So when they are even looking at the physical form of Ramakrishna, what that form represents for them is their spiritual ideal. And so this form becomes a kind of a tangible hook on which the mind can hold. And the beauty of such divine forms is that they become the window to something larger beyond them. So it's like in some surgeries, they will, I don't know the technical term, but sometimes they will have these sutures, and those sutures don't have to be removed afterwards. After some time, after the part heals, they just melt away and they are discarded by the body. So a divine form on which people meditate are a little bit like that. So apparently, yes, it would seem like you are meditating on a limited form of someone who did appear in a human form. But when those who have meditated on such forms with faith, devotion, and through that purity and clarity of mind, have found that form then melts into the formless. Even when people repeat a mantra, that is a sound, that is a name. But again, there is that power of the mantra is such that the journey always becomes from the name to beyond name, from the sound to beyond sound, from form to beyond form. So that's the benefit of meditating on the form. All don't have to do it, but those who feel the benefit from it are welcome to do that. Yes.
Swamiji, you mentioned Buddha and Krishna today, and in contradiction between the two. So one of the questions that comes into one's mind is that Buddha found the enlightenment by leaving his family and went out and then got the... While Krishna was always sort of with Arjuna or anywhere in living a worldly life. How does one determine which is the right option to go for from point of view of a mortal being like us?
Oh, good. I think it's very helpful so that we know that one doesn't necessarily have to give everything and take to monastic life in order to experience the highest, because it's possible to do it even without. So we have these two, there are several, but at least these two examples by which we know that it's possible to attain that highest truth, that highest reality, no matter where one is. Once somebody asked Swami Brahmananda, a great disciple of Ramakrishna, that I want to leave this world and go. How to renounce the world? And Swami Brahmananda said, nobody can renounce the world, no matter where you go. Even if you go on the top of a mountain, you hide yourself inside a monastery or a convent, you go inside the deepest of jungle, you're still in the world. You're not outside the world. Maybe you're not living in a community inside a city, but you're still in the world. So the world is not the problem. In fact, the example that sometimes Vedanta teachers give is that of a boat. Now, a boat is the best place for the boat to be is the water, because then it's very helpful. If you want to cross a river, go across a lake, a boat can help you go on the other side. Now that's the right place to be. But the water has to be outside the boat. If the water fills the boat, think of the Titanic, then it's not very helpful. So the world is the right place to be in, and it's not as if we have any choice. That's where we are. So it's not about being in the world is not a problem. Is the world inside me? That's the problem. So what is inside my heart? What does my heart aspire for? If all that my heart aspires for are the material goals that this world has to offer, that's fine. But then I'm opening myself to all the pains and sorrows and joys that are associated with it. And if someone feels, oh, I have no problem with it, I'm happy with the joys and sorrows, then that's fine. There is no compulsion that people have to think about the Atmana, have to think about. No one is forcing anybody. So if people are happy with the way things are, they don't have to do anything. But if they feel, now things could be better, that this is not a happy state of things, it is to such people that we have these texts, these scriptures which say, if you are not happy with the way things are, there is a different way to do it. There is a way to transcend your limitations. And so it's good that the Krishna and Buddha are actually good examples to show that your external circumstances don't determine whether you can be spiritual or not. It's completely an internal process. Yeah.
Hariom Swamiji. I'm struggling with the concept of, or the practice of how to renounce ownership of an action. I feel like I have a very strong intrinsic locus of control. If I see something wrong, I believe that I have the power to change it, and I'm grateful to have the body, mind, intellect to do so. So how can we reconcile removing I from the action with having personal responsibility for a situation?
Yeah, good. As long as we feel personally responsible, we have to carry out all our responsibilities. And there is no question of reconciling it. It's a question about what kind of self-identity I have. It's like this. How we see the world, how we see our place in the world is directly connected with how we see ourselves. They are related. So if I see myself as a human being with this responsibility, that's fine. But along with that self-identity, the way I look upon what I should do in the world, how I should do it, how I should look upon it, will be directly related to how I see that. On the other hand, if I see myself, if what this book says makes sense to us, and if we say, well, right now I feel like a human being, but this is something I need to think about. Maybe my real identity might be different. And people speak up, you see, people, even in devotional language, people speak about God is our father, God is our mother, we are all God's children. So our identity as a God's child should really come in conflict with our so-called duties and responsibilities in life. Because if I look upon myself as a God's child, then everyone around me, people I like and people I dislike, people I love and people I hate, all of them are God's children. So the way I deal with people will be very different. So just as any kind of an identity that I have now, and if I try to embrace any of these identities presented by these different spiritual traditions, there is going to be some kind of a conflict there. So it's not about somehow reconciling the two, but seeing whether this new way of thinking helps me become a better person, a truer person, if this is something I'm comfortable with. If I'm not comfortable with it, then I have to just go back to my older way of thinking, which I was accustomed to. And it does happen that way. A lot of time people read this, for some time it might provide a great intellectual stimulation, and then it's after some time it's like, oh well, it doesn't seem very relevant to my life right now. And then people might stop reading it. And so it's like undertaking any kind of a project. And a lot of people go to music classes. Not everyone becomes a top musician. Some people then drop off on the way because they cannot continue it for one reason or another. Spiritual life also is a little bit like that. So we'll stop here today, and we'll continue its discussion when we meet next Wednesday. Om Jananim Saradam Devim Ramakrishnam Jagadgurum Padapadme Tayo Shritva Pranamami Muhur Muhuhu. So next Sunday we will not have the satsang as usual here because we are going to have a Durga Puja, but the puja will be completely online. So those of you who would like to participate in the puja can do it from the comfort of your home. So we will meet next on Wednesday here in person. On Saturday meditation also will not be there because of the puja on Sunday. So we meet here a week from now, but you're all welcome to participate in the worship on Sunday morning at 10:30. That's online. We'll conclude with a prayer now. May the Divine Being, who is the Father in heaven of the Christians, Holy One of the Jewish faith, Allah of the Muslims, Buddha of the Buddhists, Tao of the Taoists, Ahura Mazda of the Zoroastrians, the Great Spirit of the Native Americans, and Brahman of the Hindus, lead us from the unreal to the real, from darkness to light, from death to immortality. May we be granted strength, freedom, and clear understanding. May we learn to see God in our own hearts and in everyone around us. May God bless us all and fill our hearts with gratitude, grace, and love. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Peace, peace, peace be unto all.